Hey guys, welcome back. We're continuing our Virtually Expo. We're joined by Kusala from W.R.K.S Games. Hey Kusala, how are you?
I'm very well, thank you, and thank you for having me.
Oh, it's an absolute pleasure. So Kusala, I want to talk to you about the Jordanheim RPG pen and paper game.
Yeah,
What can you tell us about it? And I'll try and bring up some images and stuff while we're talking.
yeah. So the Jordanheim RPG is our unique intellectual property, and it's as a universe, it's kind of a cross between. Well, it's based on Viking mythology and history as the grounding framework, and then from that we've extrapolated our own ideas about how magic and monsters and adventures should work in there. But if you
Yeah,
think of Scandinavia during Viking times, then you're on a pretty good track to start with.
cool. And what about the actual system itself, Kusala? Is there is it its own RPG system, or is it based on a fifth ed system, or?
It's not based on fifth ed. So
Hmm.
the Jordanheim RPG is actually based on a system originally created by a buddy of mine, and it's called Polyphony. And from many many years ago, he's got his own RPG running on that as well. But a modified version of that is what came into the rule set of the
Hmm.
Jordanheim RPG. And there's a couple of things we wanted to do with this. First of all, most of the games that we develop, no matter whatever they are really quite storytelling heavy. And as a game master who's running a game, you're telling a story. And in most RPGs, that tends to get bogged down quite a bit during combat.
Yeah.
So something we wanted to do was have a rule set that if you wanted to go the entire distance to create a really complex rule and mechanical style of game, you had that option. But at the same time, if you were new to RPGs and you wanted to get started quickly and be fluid and prioritize the story, you had that option too.
Yeah.
So one of the nice things about this particular system is the fact that combat is very fluid. We do use the full plethora of dice, but there's not much rolling to be done. The mechanics are quite simple. You can use a single roll to do a check whether or not your attack has hit. That same roll will determine whether or not the other person can defend and how much damage they take, and so on and so forth.
Hmm.
So a degree of simplicity wielded in there. But other than that, it's quite similar. If you're familiar with Dungeons and Dragons, it's a similar style of tabletop RPG, but simpler.
Yeah. So in terms then of the main gaming points of this system, I- is it seems as it's a faster game to play, perhaps. Yeah.
It is a faster game to play. I tend to find that one thing where, from a design point of view, I think we haven't quite nailed it yet in this iteration is getting people up and running perhaps a little bit faster.
Hmm.
Because as with most rule books, you can easily get bogged down into the rule book itself. And
Yeah.
we've tried to provide quick start guides, pre-generated characters, combat scenario examples to get people just up and running quickly. But there will in our play testing, there was still a tendency for people to get roped into the lore, to get roped into the rule set, and then get bogged down in that a little bit too much instead of actually getting going.
Yeah.
So I think that's still a challenge we've got, something we need to address with the next iteration. But everything you need to really get started fast is there. And we've got like basically a quick start guide to get you up and running quickly.
So if folk want to get involved in this over the course of Virtually Expo, what events and demos do you have running?
We have actually got two running per day. Two running on Saturday and one running on Sunday, and you'll find them on the events page. If you just search for the word Jordanheim
Hmm.
on the Games Expo site, you'll find it. And it's actually being run by the writer who wrote the RPG as well, Dan
Nice.
Cross. So he's going to be doing them himself. So you'll get to meet him as well. And we're going to be running them on Roll20. I think it's four to six people per session. You can either, if you have a Roll20 account, you can sign up directly for an event, or just swing by our Discord and holler at us, and we'll get you signed up.
And that's completely free. People can get involved in that free of charge. Yeah.
Doesn't cost a penny.
Awesome.
I,
Awesome.
I love games like that where you can just dive in and start learning a game and being exposed to a world, and then from there you get hooked and dragged right into it, which is fun.
So in terms then of the Viking mythology and stuff like that, Can you describe the world a little bit? Like, is it gritty? Is it realistic? Is it very fantastical? Or what direction did you take
it? Quite realistic. So at base, I would say it's a low magic world. So think more Lord of the Rings oriented. The magic is there and it's powerful. Mm-hmm. So if you look at the land itself, it is Scandinavia during that time. And the visual of the land, if you look at the map, for example, is quite recognizable. Mm-hmm. We've pulled some geographical features that are consistent: large cities, large blocks of areas. We have the Norway, the Sweden, the Denmark, Finland. Mm-hmm. The way magic works is that the entire pantheon is there that you would expect from Viking mythology, and you get magic from the gods. And magic is heavily centered around women. So the witch or the female character of the magic user is the one that is closest to the god in the form of channeling the magic, and where magic manifests itself in different ways in different parts of the land. So if you go right back to the creation myth, if you will, of the land, there was no separation between man and god. They walked the land equally. Yeah. And as the historical timeline progresses and man started to carve his own sense of himself, he started pushing at the boundaries of magic. So the magic, everything related to mythology, fled to a degree to something called the Shroud, which is an alternative plane that lies sort of on top of the world. Yeah. It's not a physical thing, but you can kind of enter it and exit it. And it's more a case of the creatures of mythology and the gods and the magic sort of receding to find its own safe place where it could exist. Mm-hmm. And over the course of the history, there's been battles between man and creature and myth and legend, and some parts of the land have separated themselves very heavily. So we have the challenging movement, which at the time of human history, when this was happening, what was happening was that Christianity was starting to encroach into Scandinavia, and was challenging the older gods and the pantheon with the one god religion. And we have a similar concept happening in Jotunheim, where in the southern parts, close to where Denmark is, close to the mainland of Europe, Christianity is starting to take a hold. Yeah. And they pretty much pushed magic out of the area. It's the equivalent of modern times in Denmark. You've got an economy, you've got a ruling class, you have social structures, magic is frowned upon. It's a low magic part of Jotunheim. Mm-hmm. And Sweden winds up being the more balancing act between the two. The Norge region is akin to the elves. They are very close to the magical world. They're shut off from the rest of the world, including the rest of Jotunheim. They feel like they've kind of cracked the right definition of society and lifestyle, and it's a superior choice, and they simply don't need foreigners. And Suomi, the area that is Finland today, has gone in completely the opposite direction. They are still as they were in the olden times, very, very close to the gods and the mythology. They live side by side, they interact, they mate, they do all of that. So you'll have like demigods wandering around the Suomi region that will never show up in Denmark. Mm-hmm. So you have this really broad world in which to create storytelling games. And the core rulebook is a whopping 174-page extravaganza to start you off with, to get you started with a really broad palette, and for you to build from there. And then we're going to follow on with 2 additional books next year, which is the World Book and the Monster Manual, which will then flesh out the other areas. It's
an incredible dynamics here between. I'm a massive fan of the Viking style and Viking era stuff. So having that dichotomy, I suppose, between those that have maybe went on to embrace Christianity and social structures versus those that are still in touch with the gods. You know, this is really, really interesting. You know, the potential that opens for your role playing and for your interaction among characters.
Yeah, well, I mean, like incredible. The Viking mythology is something that's so deep and so rich. You know, are you going to play that character who's given up, went to Christianity, or are you going to be tied to the old spirits of the land? Are you going to be praying to the spirits of the fields and the woods in hopes that they're going to, you know, grant their blessings so that you can travel safely, get a good crop, things like that? Yeah. You know, I absolutely love that aspect of the Norse pagan mythology.
Do the whole Ragnar Lothbrok thing, Justin, where we embrace it all and just hope for the best.
Warren, let's be honest. If I was alive in Viking times, I would be a slave.
Yes.
And you would most likely be a Jarl, and I would be your slave.
Yes.
One of the nice things about this, the way we've constructed this, is this thing you guys touched on there, is that the role-playing aspect is immense. Because you have the many different groupings and thought processes, and then you have those that challenge that as well. So let's say you have a party that contains a hermidor, which is the equivalent of like a professional soldier, but is trained part of the Christian militia, who has then decided to leave that and go off on an adventuring extravaganza with this motley band he's put together, and one of them happens to be a witch from Sverige that has a very close tie to the old god. You've got great role-playing potential there.
Yeah.
That it's the dichotomy between the two religions, because Christianity, it's a very hard, it's all bound up in one book, whereas Norse mythology, it's an oral religion, so it's passed person to person. So the actual interpretations are far more fluid as to what you're doing for your different rituals and stuff. I find that really interesting.
And we've actually tried to capture that in some of the character classes, because there's not just a magic user. You can play the witch, which is kind of the closest thing to a standard magic user, where you're pulling power from the gods and channeling it into energy. There's also a class called the Runecaster, which is a very specialized witch class that doesn't actually cast anything but imbues objects with magic. Craft magical armor, imbue a lock with the spell, create a trap. And then on the other side of the spectrum, there are the wild cards. You can play as a God Touch character. A God Touched is a male magic user who has channeled the magic by either because of a genetic anomaly or by virtue of actually trying to do it. But a God Touch character cannot hold on to the magic in a safe way. Progressively, he gets mad over time. So when you're playing a God Touch character, you start out knowing you're eventually going to go mad and either kill yourself or everyone else. And then you kind of need to progress from the start to that point in whatever way your character progresses.
Can I say sold? That sounds like an incredibly fun character to play.
It does, doesn't it? Yeah.
It's likely to be a cool character to have at the table, even though the life might be somewhat short-lived.
Creatures. Can you give us an idea of the creatures that are in the current book? And then you'd mentioned that there's a monster manual on the way.
There is indeed. Okay, so on the current book, this is actually one of the things that the playtesters came up with quite quickly. We haven't given we've done like examples of what a creature would look like, stat blocks, and examples of how to craft a creature, but we haven't gone overboard with giving you a list of creatures. The mythology and the ecology of the land is what you'd expect. So you can expect to see the wide plethora of Viking and Scandinavian related creatures. So the basic ones like wolves and bears, elk, but then you have the dangerous ones like the trolls. And we've given a few examples of this in the book itself, but the good stuff is coming in the monster manual down the line. But between these two things, the way we're releasing the game is we have the core rule book, which is largely a good bit of lore in the world and a large bit on the actual rules of the game, a small bit on examples of items, spells, and monsters. Over the next couple of months, we're going to be releasing YouTube videos and online content that you can download completely for free, whether you bought the book or not. And we'll then start fleshing out some of these examples more clearly while you wait for the second and third book to rock up in 2021.
Very cool. Okay, here's an idea for you then, Warren. Let's say this game is going to allow you to actually go out, research your favorite Viking legends, and you've essentially now got a toolkit to build the monsters and villains from that to recreate that in an RPG.
Yeah.
Now, wouldn't that be fun to play?
Yeah.
That's exactly what we're expecting people to do. That's exactly what we're expecting people to do.
W.R.K.S games. I want to talk a little bit about W.R.K.S games. Can you tell us a little bit more about the company and what your vision for the company is?
Yeah, I certainly can. So I've been meaning to start a game company for quite some time. So depending on how far ago you were involved in the role-playing game industry, when I was a young fellow, some 25 years ago, I started one of the first ebook-based tabletop game companies around called Sylvan Publishing. This was back in the day when Monty Cook got going and Drive-Thru RPG got started and so on and so forth. We did pretty well as an ebook publisher, but I've always wanted to start a game company, like a computer game company as well. So I made one attempt at it a few years later. That didn't go very well. And I learned a few important lessons then. With that in mind, W.R.K.S games was started about 3 years ago with a really long-term focus. So we have a few core pillars. One of them is the fact that we only build games in our own universe. Essentially, as a company, we are a universe building company. And Jotunheim is our first universe. A second one is going to be announced in January. And all of the games and content that we create are focused on those universes. So inside the Jotunheim universe, we do computer games, PC and console games, the first one of which is now finishing up and coming out on the November the 4th. We do tabletop games like the Jotunheim core rulebook. We also are going to be working on a board game next year. And we have a comic out, and we have original YouTube productions underway. So animated TV series, individual episodes, and so on. So a complete plethora of content into one universe. So that's the ethos of the company, is to actually be a broad content and media producer, interactive and non-interactive, but very strongly in our own IPs and in our own universes. So in broad strokes, that's what the company is about. And today we're a relatively small unit of people from all over the world. So I am in the United Kingdom, but we're about 15 people in total. And I would say probably about 8 of them are on the regular payroll. Every single one of them are freelancers who are, in various ways, very good at what they do in their various fields. Everything from 2D artists to developers to 3D artists, music, et cetera, that we need for the work. And that's how the company intends to grow. So it's a very broad game development company designed to create original content.
Well, we have just received a very important question for you, Kosala. Can you tell us about the katana leaning up against the wall behind you?
What is wrong?
Everybody in the chat is noticing the katana.
There is nothing wrong with owning swords. I own swords.
We want to know the story of that sword, though, Kosala.
This is actually a boken, which is a practice sword and not an actual sword. It is, however, the same size and weight as an actual sword. And back in the day when I was doing various kinds of martial arts, Kendo was one of the things that I practiced. And it wasn't really ever my thing for a really odd reason. It's like, I don't know whether people are familiar with Kendo. Is kind of a weird martial art, because most other martial arts are about, oh my goodness, we will evolve your soul, teach you peace. Yeah. Kendo has nothing to do with that. It's purely competitive. It's about killing the opponent.
Yes.
All right.
And the problem is that there are some strict rules, and you don't get points unless you scream while you do the thing. I just got fed up with the screaming, to be honest. So I gave up on the Kendo, but I kept up with the sword practice just because it's very good exercise. It's actually really good upper body exercise because it's hard to wield the sword.
We're just watching the chat channel here, Kosala, and there's a wave of relief because I believe some of them were expecting you to be saying there can be only one and embark on a spate of beheadings.
Right. A little question for me then. So you've done Kendo. Have you ever faced Alessio Cavatore? Because I know he used to be a practitioner as well.
Alessio?
No, I have not. My actual formal training in Kendo is very short-lived.
Okay.
And because it's a funny thing when you start actually doing it, because it is not a normal thing to want to hurt someone, which is why there's the extravagant armor.
Oh yes.
It is it's incredibly absorbent. You can't feel a thing, but it is extremely hard to actually hit someone.
Okay.
Like the first month, the only thing we did was the trainer just had all of us just come charging at him and hit him really hard on the head. It took me a good 2 or 3 days to actually strike the person.
Okay.
Just within millimeters. Yeah. And he was always sitting there going, "Amazing control. Now hit me." And it just couldn't. I just couldn't do it. So it was one of these things.
Well, I will now steer us back on topic.
Of course. Normally it's you that segues us off.
You're launching a W.R.K.S store, Kosala. What can you tell us about that?
Yes. So the W.R.K.S store is an exciting endeavor. One of our more ambitious endeavors. Also one of the crazier ones. So if you look at, and this is true for both the PC gaming and the tabletop gaming arena, I think over the last 20 years, the digital side of it and digital sales of it has really come up in an amazing way, which is great for independent content creators and for self-publishing, and it's been a wonderful thing. So in the PC gaming world, we have monopolies handled by Steam and Epic Games, who monopolize a good 80% of the digital distribution. They take a 30% cut. In the tabletop gaming world, we have H.io and Drive-Thru RPG, who Drive-Thru also takes a 30% cut. And whereas these guys were all instrumental in really creating the digital industry and creating that avenue for self-publishing, they've also monopolized those industry sectors quite heavily over the last 10, 15 years. And when you are, and I'm sure any independent self-publishing studio or creator can attest to this, giving up 30% of your revenue is a tough thing to do. And most independent studios do not have the kind of margins where giving up 30% of your revenue is acceptable and leads to being able to have a living wage, or leads to being able to be profitable over time. So when we started doing our publishing and utilizing these stores, we realized that A, this wasn't feasible, and B, what can we do about it? W.R.K.S Games is kind of a weird thing. We have a really strong technology capability in the company. We have very strong development, like a software development capability. So we decided to work on building our own store using completely state-of-the-art technology and infrastructure and cloud services available today that those companies never had when they built their stores and their infrastructure is based on. And we thought, how far can we push this price down so we can give more money back to the creators? So we've gotten to the point where we feel that we can go as low as taking £1 per unit sold. Regardless of the price of the unit, we only need to take £1. So we're going to launch a store on the 1st of September. It's going to actively compete with DriveThruRPG, with itch.io, with Steam and the Epic Games Store across tabletop and PC gaming. We're going to start with tabletop. We're going to move into PC gaming later on in the year. And the idea is to provide consumers with an alternative store, a competitor in the marketplace that can provide a feature set and an experience that's different from everything else out there. And then on the back end, for the industry to have a store where doing paid marketing to drive traffic to that store page, or doing your active effort to drive traffic to that store page actually makes sense. Because I think today no store can effectively market every single creator on there. Creators have got to do their own marketing, including paid marketing. But if you're then driving that traffic to a store that takes 30%, you've got the paid marketing cost, the 30% cut, and then your revenue, you'll have nothing left. So trying to create the store that allows people to thrive as independent creators, earn a living wage off the products they sell, and introduce a feature set on both the back end and the consumer end that allows for that to happen.
See, I quite like this idea, because some of those younger games companies out there, that margin that they're trying to make, that's not just their living wage. That's the dream for a lot of the younger companies out there. It's also their expansion capital, their reinvestment capital.
Exactly. And it's about trying to get as much of that savings back to them as possible, because for us, the company's revenue and profit model is not based on the store. We are actually a game developer, and we have our own business model that works there. And we're actually going to be selling our products on the store as well. So the store has a few things. I mean, there's a couple of things I'm trying to do with this. One of them is creating a really cutting-edge feature set for both the consumer market and the developer market, but actually also, providing services that no one else can provide, that can only happen through our store, and also trying to change some behaviors, because I think Steam and DriveThru are both in ways reasons why small studios think they need to underprice their products. Because if you're selling with 30,000 other products and somebody's priced at £9, and you as an independent creator think your product needs only to be worth £2 in order to sell, that is not true. And in the PC gaming world and in the tabletop gaming world, we know that the £9 to £19, the premium indie market, is actually where most units and most money is made. And people are actively underpricing their products because they think they have to make it possible to sell them. So we're going to, and some of this behavior is learned behavior from how the stores are acting today. And what we're trying to do is try to unravel this. So on the user-facing end, there's a couple of interesting things about the store. Every single category page is randomized. We have no top lists. We have no bestsellers. We don't push anyone based on existing success. Every single time you go to the store and hit, let me go to the horror category or the RPG category, that page you see is completely randomly generated. So no matter how many products are on there, your product has an equal amount to be discovered as any other product by any consumer. So that's the first thing. The second thing we're going to do is not allow sales. There will be no sales. We are assisting the creators with pricing their products fairly, and we are encouraging consumers to pay the price that the product is actually worth, and trying to school them out of the sale mentality. because we've come to a point where for many of the digital stores, consumers are basically just waiting for a sale to happen because they know one is coming. And it's not because they think the product isn't worth the price. They're just being schooled to wait for it.
Yeah.
And we're not going to have any form of discounts or sales at all. We're encouraging creators to price their product fairly and treat their consumers fairly, and also telling the consumers to treat these hardworking developers and creators fairly and buy the product at a fair price so they can continue to build another great product down the line.
Yeah.
Interesting.
Well, disruptive strategy for sure. Right.
Indeed.
We're having people asking about the Jordheim RPG. Is the book available at the moment? If you bring up the web page there, Justin, I know that people can go to jordanheim.com.
Correct.
And the trailers and information is there. And I think if you click the shop, the core rulebook is available there. The core rulebook can be bought at the moment, yes?
Yes, it can. The core rulebook is indeed out, and when we have launched the W.R.K.S store, it will appear exclusively on our store only, but that page will link to it.
Yeah.
You can buy it right now on the existing jordanheim.com site.
Grand. Kosala, look, thank you so much for taking the time to join us tonight. It's been an absolute pleasure hearing your plans. We will be keeping in touch to find out more about Jordanheim and especially these next two expansions. So definitely keep in touch.
I most certainly will. Thank you again for having me. Have a most excellent evening.
We will indeed. We will indeed.